While on tour, an indie rock band meets a captivating local who introduces them to her relatives who keep an unsettling secret. In June 1982 in the Falkland Islands, a British trooper named Sergeant Watts was by a bonfire, updating his comrade about the demise of 5 Argentinian soldiers. Unbeknownst to an armed officer, one of the fallen men, Antonio, whose face was painted black, unexpectedly rises and attacks him, causing his phone to drop to the ground. Later, Sergeant Watts awakened and saw the man before him holding a sharp tool and eating something. Unable to move, the officer threatens the stranger that he'll end him. Nevertheless, the man merely chuckled and gestured towards the ground. Upon noticing the bandage and boot, the soldier was shocked to realize that his lower leg had been severed. Moments later, Watts screamed as he figured out that the strange man was cooking and consuming his severed limb. In the present, a touring indie rock band known as the Ravens arrives in Baco, a small club in Argentina. However, guitarist Mark and his girlfriend Sophie are disappointed upon seeing the place. Responding to their reactions, the band manager, Javi, acknowledges that it's the only venue he could find in the town. On the other hand, the bassist and vocalist, Jane, offers a more optimistic perspective, suggesting that it's not as bad as it seems. The drummer, Billy, appears to be chill and excited to play. As the musicians approach the entrance, they notice a group of men barbecuing nearby. Backstage, the manager reviews the photos he's taken of the bassist, whom he secretly admires. As Jane practices her piece, an irritated Mark returns from the restroom, complaining about its filthiness. Javi then reminds the band that they're set to perform in 10 minutes. However, the guitarist voices his frustration about consistently playing in venues with crappy conditions and sound quality. Suddenly, Mark asks about payment, but the manager clarifies that they'll only receive it after the show. Displeased by this, the musician becomes upset and desires to quit, suspecting they may get scammed. Javi attempts to reason with the agitated band member, emphasizing that such situations have occurred only once. When Mark insists on getting paid before they play, Sophie interjects, reassuring her boyfriend that they're not being scammed. Jane then steps into the conversation, suggesting that it's not a significant issue given that they only have 20 people in the audience anyway. Disappointed, Mark asserts that their manager is responsible for bringing people to their show. Javi then explains that he's doing his best, but the musician wants to back out despite his explanation. Soon, Billy enters the room and asks what's happening, prompting the annoyed band member to confess that he's no longer interested in playing. However, the drummer asserts that since it's the tour's last show, he doesn't care if nobody shows up. He will still not miss it. This statement sparks an argument between them, but eventually, Mark agrees not to ditch the band. During the band's performance later, their audience enthusiastically bangs their heads in response to the hardcore music. Suddenly, a woman named Carla joins the crowd, casting a sinister look toward the musicians as they end their song. After the show, the band bonds over drinks. Javi shares the photos from their performance with Jane. Abruptly, Billy excuses himself and heads to the bathroom to consume illegal substances. After that, he goes to the bar to order a drink and encounters Carla, who immediately praises him and his band. The drummer subtly flirts with her, and she reciprocates, offering him a bonus for his excellent performance. Soon, they move near the stage and begin dancing together, which Billy's groupmates and manager witnessed. Later, as the band prepares to leave, the drummer suggests to his bandmates that they should drop off Carla in her nearby town since her car broke down. However, Mark refuses, citing that their camper is already loaded. Despite Billy's efforts to convince them otherwise, Sophie insists that the woman take a cab instead. However, this only leads to an argument between Mark and Billy. Carla then interjects, proposing they stay at her place instead since the band has drinks and it's unsafe to drive in their condition. The woman tries to entice them by describing her place as a big country house with plenty of rooms. Additionally, she mentions that her uncle is hosting a big barbecue. Hearing this, the band agrees, and Carla promises to give them directions to her location. Later on the road, Javi notices that they're in the middle of nowhere and worries if they're in the right place. After the manager stops driving, an annoyed Sophie interrupts Carla and Billy, who share a romantic moment in the back of the camper. The guitarist's girlfriend blames the woman for their current situation, assuming she is a courtesan scamming them. Angered by this accusation, Carla storms out, threatening everyone that they will pay for mistreating her. Disappointed by his group's actions, Billy gets upset and chases after her. In shock at the drummer's sudden reaction, the band discusses not leaving their bandmate behind and begins a search. Unfortunately, he is nowhere to be found. Later, Mark suggests waiting for Billy for 30 minutes and leaving if he doesn't. However, the band sleeps inside the vehicle until the following day. Realizing that the drummer hasn't returned, Javi suspects something terrible might have happened to him. However, the guitarist dismisses his concerns, saying he's seen too many horror movies. Worried, Jane, looking into the distance, asks the manager where they're headed. He responds Epecuén. Upon hearing this, she directs the group to look outside, where they spot a signpost that reads Carla's hometown. Unbeknownst to them, Antonio emerges with a machete in the empty field, clutching a mysterious bag. He gazes at the moving vehicle, pointing his weapon at it. Meanwhile, Jane looks outside and notices the ruins. Javi informs her that the place was flooded years ago. Sophie reacts, wondering why Carla lives in such an inhabitable area. Curious, Mark searches for Epecuén on the internet and discovers that the place was once one of Argentina's most important tourist villages. People visited the town because of the healing properties of its thermal waters. However, in 1985, a massive volume of water breached the protective barrier, causing the village to be submerged under 10 meters of salt water, resulting in the town's disappearance. 30 years later, the water receded, revealing Epecuén's ruins and exposing a desolate, deserted landscape. The residents never returned. After hearing the information, Sophie expresses the place gives her the creeps and assumes that Billy might be somewhere else. Soon, Javi parks and the band disembarks from the vehicle to explore the ruins. Jane finds the place surreal, while Mark invites Sophie to swim. Later, the manager invites the vocalist to search for their missing friend. As they explore the ruins, Jane expresses her doubts, admitting she senses something terrible has happened. However, Javi assumes their group mate is probably somewhere safe with Carla. While walking, Javi asks her if she has a boyfriend, prompting her to reveal that they'd broken up before the tour. Continuing their conversation, the bassist shares her desire to travel and meet more people. Hearing this, the manager proposes that he'll handle her career since she's a great singer and suggests she stay in his apartment. Suddenly, their conversations are interrupted when Jane sees someone from afar. During Sophie's sunbathing, she vents her frustrations about Billy, expressing how he always ruins everything and they always have to clean up his mess. Suddenly, Mark stops responding, prompting Sophie to become worried. Unexpectedly, the guitarist jumps out in front of her, surprising her. Startled, the woman instinctively hits him, but he quickly reassures her that he's just pranking her. Unbeknownst to them, a man with a sharp weapon is nearby, watching them. Concurrently, Jane and Javi approach the middle-aged man, Shimago, oddly holding a wrench. He stands in front of his vehicle with Aram's head on the hood. The manager speaks to him in Spanish and informs him that they're looking for their missing friend. The bassist then interrupts their discussion, whispering to Javi that the man uses Billy's handkerchief. Realizing this, the manager asks the stranger about their friend's whereabouts. The man chuckles and points behind them. Suddenly, Carla arrives, holding a dagger. She tells them that they'll regret what they did. Upon hearing this, Jane yells at the woman, asking what she'd done to their friend. Javi then interjects and explains that they did nothing to her, convincing her to let them go. However, wearing the rum's head, Shimago walks closer behind the manager and surprises him by choke holding him. Realizing they're in danger, Javi immediately tells Jane to run before he loses consciousness. Meanwhile, Sophie and Mark are passionately kissing when the phone suddenly rings. The guitarist excuses himself to take the call, assuming it must be Javi. However, when he picks up the call, Antonio, who's wearing an animal's head, appears behind him and knocks him down with a sharp weapon. Sophie puts on her lipstick as she waits for her boyfriend's return. Suddenly, Antonio approaches her from behind and takes advantage of her. When the woman raises her mirror, she realizes it's a stranger, not Mark. Meanwhile, Jane runs from a man with a bat wrapped in barbed wire who's chasing her. She hides behind a post, but a muscular man named Tito catches her. To escape, the bassist uses her sharp tool to hurt the man. As she continues running, a vehicle follows her, driven by an old man named Taddeo. Relieved, she asks for help and he gives her a ride. However, the musician soon realizes the driver's not taking her out of town. She then looks at the sun visor and sees a photo of the old man and Carla, indicating they're related. When they arrive at the slaughterhouse, the woman tries to escape, but the stranger threatens her to stay put by showing her his pistol. Billy, Mark, Sophie, and Javi are chained and gagged in the holding pen. Jane is brought in shortly after, joining her friends in their miserable situation. Witnessing such an unfortunate sight, the drummer demands that Chimango release their friend. When the man does nothing and approaches him, the drummer accuses him of being weak and challenges him to fight man to man. Sitting on his throne, Taddeo hears about the musician's request and signals Carla to release Billy. Afterward, the band member fights with Chimango, ultimately knocking him down. When Billy's friends cheer for the drummer's victory, the old man shoots into the ceiling to silence them. He then tells Carla to tell the captives they will be released if they win one more fight. Upon hearing this, the group becomes hopeful. Soon, Taddeo calls Billy's next opponent, the muscular Tito, who ends up overpowering him. Tito delivers several punches to the musician, ultimately leading to his demise. Afterward, Antonio cooks the man's meat for dinner. When the food is served on the table, the old man proposes a toast before enjoying the meal. However, the captives are trembling and don't want to eat the food. Later, Chimango hands Tito a plate and asks him to eat in the corner. Then, he throws the piece of meat on the floor, and a mysterious hand grabs it. Mark, Sophie, Jane, and Javi don't like to partake in the meal in the dining area. To coerce them into eating, the old man shoots and gestures for them to eat the meat, prompting the terrified captives to comply. After tasting it, the bassist immediately spits the food and coughs. Because of this reaction, Carla suddenly argues with her uncle. Following their disagreement, Antonio takes Mark while Chimango pulls Sophie out of the dining area, leaving the bassist and manager alone with the old man. Antonio brings the helpless guitarist into his room and takes out a needle to stitch the man's arm wound, causing him to endure excruciating pain. After this, he positions himself behind him and removes his clothing. On the other hand, Chimango brings the bound and gagged Sophie to the meat processing room. He lays her on the table and threatens her with a hook, intensifying her fear. Afterward, he puts on gloves and burns her leg with acid, causing her to endure excruciating pain as well. Meanwhile, Jane and Javi are brought back to the holding pen, unaware of what's happening to their friends. They try to comfort each other during their unfortunate situation. Suddenly, the manager notices another bound woman, Erica, nearby and concludes that she might be the dog whom the cannibalistic family feeds. However, Jane assumes that, like them, she might be a captive too. Javi attempts to speak with her, but she hides herself. Worried, the bassist thinks that the family kept the woman alive and might do the same to her. Realizing this, she cries, expressing her desperation to go home. Suddenly, Javi notices that Jane's chain is loose. The captor forgot to lock her up. He immediately tells her about this, and the bassist can move to his area. The manager then uses his mouth to untie the rope binding her wrists. He advises her to escape, but she promises not to leave him because she fears he might get killed. Meanwhile, Taddeo asks Chimango to transfer Sophie to the bedroom. When he doesn't follow immediately, the old man threatens him with a gun. In another room, Mark sits helplessly before the TV where a soccer match between Argentina and England unfolds. Suddenly, Antonio takes a seat and lights a cigar. Eventually, he positions himself in front of his captive and tenderly kisses his forehead. Discovering Sophie in bed, Taddeo wakes her and points to a cherished photo of his old wife on the wall. He then places the white nightgown on Sophie, wishing to see her resemble the beautiful woman. Despite Sophie's confusion and tears, he insists she wears the dress, threatening her with a sharp weapon. Later, after the captive puts on the outfit, the old man kisses her on the cheek and prepares to place her on the bed. Concurrently, Tito heads to the holding pen and notices that Jane has escaped. After the muscular man checks the area, Javi calls him and immediately stabs him upon his approach. Jane explores the slaughterhouse and finds the keys on the wall near the bedroom. However, she quickly hides upon hearing Chimango's footsteps. Suddenly, Chimango enters the room and sees Taddeo with his arms wrapped around Sophie. This sparks an argument between them and they fight over the woman. Chimango threatens to end the old man if he doesn't surrender the captive to him. However, this only provokes Taddeo to slash Sophie's throat, leading to her demise. Meanwhile, the bassist emerges from her hiding spot to get the keys. However, she only sees Sophie now lifeless inside the bedroom, prompting her to close her mouth in shock. Hearing Carla arrive, she hides again. Later, Carla enters the room and argues with Taddeo, who strikes her. In response, Chimango intervenes and stops the old man, who then stabs him. Witnessing this, the woman breaks down in tears, prompting her uncle to point a gun at her, throw her onto the bed, and take advantage of her. At that point, Jane swiftly grabs the keys and runs. She helps Javi break free. However, just as they're about to embrace, Antonio suddenly shoots the bassist. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, Chimango awakens and surprises Taddeo from behind, strangling him to his demise. In the holding pen, Antonio attempts to strangle Javi, but Mark rushes in to rescue him, sparking a fight between them. However, the former soldier overpowers Mark and stabs him in the chest. In a desperate move, the guitarist grabs a rock nearby and smashes it on Antonio's head before taking his last breath, ultimately ending his enemy's life. Meanwhile, Javi notices that Jane's still breathing. Aware that she may not last much longer, the bassist urges him to help Erica, the other captive, escape. Following the bassist's demise, the manager approaches the woman, reassuring her they'll go home. He carries her, and as he passes by the hall, he locks eyes with Carla, who silently allows him to escape. Javi then takes Erica to the camper. However, as they're about to leave, the woman suddenly bites his neck, ending his life. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.